And it looks like we are live. Let's do our check as we always do. Looks like we are good to go on YouTube. There we go. And on X and Facebook. All right. So we're live where we need to be. Good evening, everyone. It is going to get pretty interesting around here, but let's lay down some ground rules. Okay. So yes, winter is going to be rocking and rolling all the way through the end of this month, and we'll discuss why. We'll go over some of the climate factors so we understand what we're dealing with. Two, for the love of God, please don't share, don't post, don't trust any snow maps, even European ensemble snow maps beyond 5 days. And that's usually my general rule, but it's especially true in this weather pattern. The reason why is that the weather pattern we are going in is so volatile and so dynamic that each storm is going to have a fundamental impact on the ones that follow. And so we need to get through each storm and then reassess because basically we are on a storm train on the thermal gradient that is going to be setting up over the region. Pretty much as I have been warning all the way back to October, mentioned it again in January, and here we are. So our relaxation period, if you want to call it a thaw, is nearly at an end, and now we're moving towards a very interesting and volatile weather pattern. So tonight, as always, just in case you're new, we're going to go over all the factors and the data that I want to share for this evening. Get to all your questions. The premium members who are in the premium chat right now, and I can see it's very active over here. Wow. So I'm going to be busy answering all these questions. They get all their questions answered. Some of them are put in statements, so I'll react to that as well. And then those of you on YouTube, X, and Facebook will get to your questions as well. Answer the best ones, i.e., don't bother asking how much in my backyard, because that's why we have maps, right? Right. So let's take a look at our data. And we start off first with our polar vortex. And boy, oh boy, is it stretching once again. There was some talk of this having a full split, but I never really bought into that. And it doesn't really meet the standard of a true split. It does an extreme split, an extreme stretch here, but then it goes right back to what you would normally expect for this winter. So what does this usually produce for us? Well, typically in this environment, it sets up the transport of polar and Arctic air right from Siberia into the United States. So this factor alone would tell me, hey, look, it's going to get cold. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be cold every day, but more often than not, we're going to be trending more towards below normal temperatures. So this is certainly a very strong support, very strong signal. And yeah, there is a potential here for a negative NAO signal as well, when you're seeing this type of stretching. This type of impact basically means for February, we're in the game in terms of winter storm potential. Once again, this does not guarantee snowfall in your backyard, but certainly supports the potential that you'll be in the game to possibly have snow, sleet, freezing rain, and whatnot. This also tells me some thoughts about early spring, i.e., March. And when you see this type of stretch occurring, you have to remember a very basic rule that we learned in high school, or you might be in high school now, I'm probably going over this. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Very basic physics here. And in that physics, we know there's going to be a strong consolidation after this severe stretching. And so I'm thinking that March is going to be shifting mild because the polar vortex is going to have to consolidate. And when you have consolidation, it pulls all the cold air up towards northern Canada, Greenland, and the Arctic Circle. where they can keep it, because no one likes a March snowstorm. Let me rephrase that. No meteorologist likes a March snowstorm because they are a nightmare to forecast for. So this right here. This not only tells you what to expect for February, but kind of gives you an idea of how the spring at least is going to start. And we should see a consolidation. Now, could we see another stretch? Absolutely, that is a potential, especially around mid-March. But by that time, your sun angle is higher, especially in the northern Mid-Atlantic. Not so much for New England, but definitely in the northern Mid-Atlantic. Your sun angle is higher. It's harder to have snow accumulation during the day, so on and so forth. So you need like a lot of factors to come together so you start moving away from that winter potential. The other forcing mechanism is, of course, our tropical forcing. Right now, our MJO is marching through phase 5 into phase 6 very, very quickly. This is a warm phase. This is supporting our La Nina spike, as I like to call it. The spike is coming to an end, and there is very strong support of getting the MJO phase for February into phase 8 around the middle of the month. And around this time period is when we're going to be keeping an eye on a storm. So, what does this mean? For those of you who may not understand the MJO and why this is important, this is basically tropical forcing, right? Thunderstorms in the tropics. And the general idea is this: if you see convection around the date line, game on. If the SOI numbers circle negative, game on. So these are all signals for an active winter weather pattern. So I kind of want to give you just the overall theme here of our weather pattern. And so when we take a look at the 500 millibar pattern, we understand what is and isn't possible. So again, when I look at this 500 millibar pattern, I don't see Cosin type major winter storms here. Why? I don't have a ridge in the west around the Rockies. This is a progressive pattern. I got a nice block here that keeps it from heading up into the Great Lakes, but all these low pressure systems, they're trucking, they're moving. This is a thermal gradient isotropic lifting type of weather pattern. Or if you want to go with the really basic term, overrunning. A lot of overrunning potential. And so with overrunning storms, the the key to understand in this type of pattern here is long range guidance is going to overdo the amount of QPF, that's the moisture involved in these storms. So that's where you get your 20-inch snowfall showing up. Of course, that usually is total snowfall being shown in a lot of these impact maps. And that's where you start to see that start to show up here. Usually what happens in reality is that the QPF backs off a little bit, and these low pressure systems end up being much weaker than what's being shown in the 10 and 15-day guidance. But in this scenario, this pattern tells me, hey, I got an active subtropical jet stream. I have cold air source to the north. I have enough blocking here to at least keep the storm track somewhere around the mid-Atlantic, somewhere between the New Jersey coast and the Delmarva Peninsula. And there will not be a shortage of storms, of short waves within the subtropical jet stream interacting with this boundary. So we're seeing that very nicely here on the European operational, and we're also seeing that here very nicely on the European ensembles. Now, the way you use these models, operational, you don't really want to put a lot of stock in it beyond 7 days in terms of the details, but it's nice to look at just to kind of get an idea of what the theme is. The ensembles gives you even better idea because it's a combination of several different runs. So in this signal, what it's telling me is that, hey, I got that negative NAO block locked in through the end of February, and I have plenty of short waves to interact with this block. I got a nice position of our upper level low around the Hudson Bay. It's going to allow cold air to come in that won't suppress these storms. I don't have my ridge. So why is that important? Broad trough. So any solution you see with a powerful low pressure system, throw it out. Any solution you see where you get massive snowfall, 10 to 20-inch type snowfalls in a single storm, throw it out. Because this pattern supports progressive moving storms, fast moving storms that are forced to move south. So the other thing I'd be very skeptical on once this gets established in roughly 5 days is any solution that takes a storm track up towards the Great Lakes. So as we start to look at the potential for next week, well, we could throw some things out here. We could throw out any type of lake cutter. We could throw out any type of strong low pressure system scenario. You want to go suppressed and weak because that's the pattern. That's the game that you're in. That's the stadium you're in. So I want to make that very clear so everyone understands what to expect here. My original rule back in, what was it, October, where I said, look for 4 to 8 inch, 3 to 6 inch type snowstorms. And I mentioned that again in January. That rule still is in place. Your upper limit is going to, unless you get like a rogue 10-inch somewhere via some sort of a convective scenario, your overall theme here is fast moving storms, 6 hour events. Could you get a scenario where you get multiple low pressure systems lined up and you create a long duration event? It's possible. I wouldn't forecast that just yet, but it is in the cards. This would be almost two separate storms coming in with maybe a 2 or 3 hour break in between. That type of scenario certainly is in the potential here. So when we're studying the thermal gradient here, first thing, I know a lot of people are using the AI model, European AI model. Use caution on that because this is the first year, right? It's kind of like in sports terms, it's kind of like expecting a rookie to be as good as a Hall of Famer, where the rookie's going to have to trip and make some mistakes before he could really step up his game. We need to see what the error is in the AI model. Where are its biases before you really start to use it? So right now it's good to observe and study. You do not add it into your model guidance just yet. Okay. It's just a good thing just to kind of study. So I just kind of want to put that out there. So the thermal gradient that shows up here is pretty impressive. And I'm not worried about the actual depiction of it. What I am interested in is how is it showing the gradient on the edge of this thing? Okay. And what I'm noticing here is that the gradient between the true Arctic air, I mean, at -20 is pretty impressive, and your marginal polar air is pretty tight. So this tells me, hey, man, these storms that develop, they're going to be able to ride along this frontogenesis, and your heavy precipitation is going to be driven more by isotropic lifting than any of your 500 millibar PVA short waves or intense 500 millibar lows or anything of that nature. This is all driven by frontogenesis, which kind of creates a bit of a difficult forecast, especially when you're looking at the medium and long range guidance, because frontogenesis isn't just one level. You can have frontogenesis at different levels in different places throughout the atmosphere, from the surface on up to the mid levels. So this tells me, hey, be on your game, drink plenty of coffee. You're going to need it because these storms are going to be really tricky to forecast for with this type of gradient setting up. So with that, notice how we're seeing this kind of retreat. Why do we see that? Because in this guidance, in this solution, the way that the short waves are interacting, you're getting this little push up into the Hudson River Valley. But that could easily, again, that gets only gets so far north because of our pattern block here. So if you get in the next model run the interaction a little bit further south in the Ohio River Valley or in the Tennessee River Valley, this whole setup shifts south. So again, what I'm trying to say is don't take any of this stuff verbatim. Just understand what the theme is. Stormy with plenty of cold air available. Then it's a question of interaction. So you really want to focus on 5 days and under, 120 hours on the model. That means all this other stuff out here, all this other data here, yeah, it's cute to look at, but I wouldn't put much weight on it. Okay? So let's make sure that we understand that. Because I know a lot of you guys like to look at the model guidance and you like to share and all that stuff. I see it on Discord. 120 hours. Once you get there, then you can start to dive into some of the details and start to wean out some of this information. So we understand what type of pattern we're in. Currently, we have high pressure in place. Clouds are increasing. Notice the temperatures and dew points here. We have 34 and 14. Why is that important? Well, that tells me I got a lot of dry air to get rid of at the lower levels. This is pretty impressive dry air. Okay. So that means we have a lot of Virgo showing up on the radar. It looks impressive. I know some people are asking, okay, Stephen, you're saying this precipitation isn't starting until 3 a.m. Well, I got all this stuff on the radar. Yes, you do. And none of it's reaching the ground. This is a very important signal for me because this tells me once the precipitation starts, our temperatures are going to be in the 20s, which makes me very concerned about eastern Pennsylvania for tomorrow morning. A couple key points here. One, our high pressure system starting to exit. Take a look at our winds. Easterly winds. If you're on the coast and you're looking for frozen precipitation, let's say a colder solution. I'm always getting that question. Could it trend colder? Very simple rule. East wind means death to snow and ice. Okay? That if you try to go colder in a forecast and you have an easterly wind, you better have an Arctic air mass in place here. And that Arctic air mass is supported somewhere else by some other factor. Because if you don't, that easterly wind rapidly eats away at this cold air, even with this type of scenario. Okay, the easterly wind will win. Now, if you're here, though, well, that isn't so much of a rule. What do I have? I have temperatures already falling into the 20s up by the Poconos, and I have dew points in the teens. Once we get that moisture starting to push in, we'll probably drop into the 20s, and then the frozen precipitation starts. In this scenario, when I study the infrared satellite picture, I focus in on this. Why do I focus in on this? This is the colder cloud tops. What do colder cloud tops tell us? It tells us rising air. The colder the cloud top, the higher the cloud, the higher the cloud, the stronger the stronger the forcing, the heavier precipitation. So this tells me, all right, I got good frontogenesis rocking and rolling here. Okay. On the water vapor satellite picture, not a very strong shortwave. In fact, the main shortwave is all the way up here. So this is all driven by isotropic lifting. There is no sign of any type of strong 500 millibar PVA enhancing the storm. There is no storm shifting north, south, east, west, or anything of that nature. This is essentially a tidal wave of warm air driving northward. So let me show you first 500. This is the 250 millibar winds. Again, you got some convergence and confluence shifting off the coast. It's going to lose our cold source. There's our short wave, not very impressive. Zonal pattern. The primary forcing here is to our north. And what that does at 850 millibars is drive warm air northward. Now, this warm air is basically like a tidal wave. Think of it when you're at the beach and you have that wave coming in, and it's like a big hump. It just marches its way through until it hits the coast, right? Well, that's what we have here. We have a wave of warm air that is just going to overwhelm everything. The problem is that at the surface, you have orographic features that kind of screw with that whole process. So 850 millibars is going to warm quickly, but the surface not so much. So when we start to look at the lifting factors here, again, there's our short wave. It's kind of delayed too. So that's really not the primary factor here. This is 850 millibars. And you see this feature right here? Uh, You see that setup here? This is essentially a warm front at 850 millibars that is supporting the lifting for this precipitation. Certainly plenty of moisture to work with here in this scenario. And here's our 850 millibar temperatures I really want to focus in on. So this is right now, okay? And we have cold air in place clearly. We have a nice gradient to our south. By midnight, look at what happens here. Why is this important to me? Well, this is telling me that there's pockets of mesoscale forcing starting to take shape here. When you start to see these pockets showing up here. And the warm air is trying to drive north quickly. In fact, between 1 a.m. and 7 a.m., the warm air is winning the fight. These pockets here tell me that I have heavy precipitation to deal with. The HRR guidance takes this and tries, earlier was trying to produce more snow. That has backed off. As we move forward, by 1 p.m., there is no more cold air for us. It's all the way up in New England. So this is basically a tidal wave of snow for a very short period of time with some heavier bursts, quickly mixing over to sleet and freezing rain. This also shows up pretty nicely here at 9 to 25 millibars. Look at this push. Look at that. That's impressive. When I see this at 7 a.m., this tells me I got a lot of sleet to work through. This is going to be a real sleety mess tomorrow morning around the rush hour. I-95 corridor, interior. This is not a snow signal to me as this is evolving. This is a sleet signal and a lot of it. And then we go at the surface, and as you can see, tomorrow morning we got a lot of below freezing temperatures here. And I'm very concerned about this signal showing up right here in eastern Pennsylvania. This whole area, I am very concerned about freezing rain. I do not see this as a snow signal because at the same time, 850 millibar temperatures are above freezing. 9 to 25 millibar temperatures are rising above freezing. We still got plenty of freezing conditions here. I-95 corridor and the coast, by this point, above freezing, pretty much rain. So when we're studying this scenario, I'm using the European, high-res European here. As you're getting out the door, I'm not so concerned down here. Might see a trace to an inch of snow. If you want to wake up at 3 a.m., have at it. New York City Metro, you're going to get your snow. Again, trace to an inch. I'm not seeing a lot out of this, but northern New Jersey through Connecticut, I could definitely see pushing over 2 inches in this setup. Look at that ice that's showing up here. And you can see the tidal wave here. You see how this heavier precipitation is showing up here in the guidance? That's our leading edge of our tidal wave. And if you don't want to use that, you want to use the HRR, it's now showing the same thing. It's saying goodbye to the mostly snow scenario that was popping up that I didn't buy into. And instead is showing a nice burst. Now, there is your 1 inch potential out there in New York City. I do not think it's going to get above that for several reasons. One, your entire temperature profile is warming up and urban heat island effect. Okay. You're rapidly warming towards freezing. You have the natural urban heat island effect. You got an easterly wind. This is going to turn very quickly. And it typically turns faster than what model guidance suggests whenever you have an easterly wind. So, New York City itself, you'll see your snow changing quickly over to sleet and freezing rain, and then finally to rain as we move on later on in the morning. Those of you in Allentown, Reading, Harrisburg, you might see this go above freezing and a little bit of rain at the very end, but this is pretty much a freezing rain mess for you guys. That's the giant concern here. And this is why I haven't changed the forecast all that much since I put it out, where I'm expecting in zone 4, I put that in bright red to make it stand out. Someone's going to get, maybe I might be underdoing this with the ice at 0.13 inches, 0.3 inches, should I say. This could easily push up to a 0.5 half inch ice if you get that heavy precipitation set up just right. So if you have any plans in this region to travel in the morning, I'd find, I don't know, delays. Don't go. In zone 3, it's not going to be too bad. It's going to be slick in the morning. Same thing in zone 2 and zone 1. We do have the best potential for accumulating snowfall. Then you get the ice in zone 1, where someone's going to get 4 inches out of this. And it's essentially going to come in that moderate to heavy burst that's going to be marching through the region on the leading edge of this warm air driving northward. So if you're traveling between essentially 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. over much of the I-95 corridor, it's going to be a bit ugly. So take some time. Don't rush. If you're traveling anytime in the morning in zone 4, stay home if you can, because it's going to get a bit nasty out there. The good news is that we all rise above freezing after this. After this storm, then we got another one to keep an eye on. Now, this one is very much in the same scenario here. Look, our short wave passes to the north. It's weak, it's disorganized. 850 millibar low associated with this is passing to our north. So, what do we know with this? We know warm air is going to win. We know that it has plenty of moisture to work with. And we know that after the cold air initially drives in on Friday, it gets driven out pretty quickly. This one, though, is going to have a little bit more of a pushback to it in terms of the cold air transport. Someone on Saturday night in Connecticut, maybe even portions of southeastern New England here, where I don't really forecast a lot, but just kind of throwing that in, that someone in here is going to get a nice moderate to heavy burst out of this, maybe a 6 to inch type snowfall here. Pretty good snowfall potential down around New York City too. Could be looking at a 1 to 3 type scenario. Have to work on the data a little bit more. I wanted to get this first storm out of the way. Why do I want to get this first storm out of the way? Because once this blows through, here's our new thermal gradient that sets up. Here's our new cold wave that sets up. So once we get a clear understanding of what that looks like on Friday, then you can get your progression of your thermal gradient retreating for Saturday night. And once you get a better idea on that, then you know what the timing is for the transition for the snow, the sleet, the freezing rain, and finally rain. Everyone goes over to rain on this storm too. The warm air wins this fight again, but not as convincingly as this one. So notice we're kind of stepping down here, right? Same thing at 925 millibars, same type of theme here. And same thing at the surface. So again, my concern here in this scenario is if you are in northeastern Pennsylvania, northwestern New Jersey, this is another ice threat again for you, because these temperatures are really struggling to rise above freezing during the bulk of this precipitation. And so that's why in this scenario for Saturday night, you're seeing this signal. This is not good news. So we have to watch this very carefully. And the other thing that's different is that this is occurring during the dead of night, coldest time of the day. So it's going to take a little bit longer for those temperatures to rise above freezing. And then we have our next storm after that. Well, how is this one different? Well, this one has my attention for one very special reason. Let me go back to 500 millibars back here. During that time period, we're getting signals here for a little bit more of a 50-50 low, or 50-50 trough at the very least. So this tells me that, hey, This will support high pressure to our north. Nice convergence and confluence to our north here. Got a nice negative NAO signal. Ridge again, like I said, is displaced, so I don't see this as a strong low, but I certainly see the support for a pretty strong thermal gradient setting up in this scenario. And so in this setup on Tuesday, at the very least, we'll start out as mostly snow. The warming that takes place here is driven directly by the movement of the weaker shortwave. So this is at 850 millibars. The one thing I noticed compared to the 0Z run and the 12Z run, 850 millibar low is consolidated and a little bit further south. So the setup is slightly colder. And that is because our shortwave on this one is a little bit further south. So the primary lifting at 500 millibars is basically right over the mid-Atlantic rather than over the eastern Great Lakes. Our 850 millibar low jumps off the coast here. So I would not be surprised as we get a little bit closer to this event that we end up with a slightly colder event. And this one is the one where I could certainly see more support for more of a widespread snowfall. So next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, which should be perfect for live chat, by the way. We'll see if I have live chat because I might be doing a live coverage all day on Tuesday. So we'll play that by ear. But certainly a lot of activity unfolding here with this storm. So that was a lot to go over. It's already 8:30, not bad. So we're going to answer all of these questions that are already in here already. And boy, do we have a lot. And let me just peek in up. And wow, YouTube has a lot as well. So of course, we're going to answer all these questions the best I can. Hopefully they're not too silly. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, first is a good one about the solar cycle, real fast. In your study of the solar cycle, impacts on winter storms going to include any study that impacts of solar particles from the coronal holes on the stratosphere. I've noticed that since December, we have many more coronal holes than it did when we started moving down towards from the solar max. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, coronal holes are basically holes in the atmosphere of the sun, and your solar winds take the particles and then they hit the atmosphere. They don't really impact circulations in the atmosphere. They more impact a lot of the electromagnetic, and for example, you get a lot of your what's it called, the lights and stuff like that in the sky. You get all the beautiful images at night, but you don't really impact the weather. There really isn't any type of correlation between the coronal holes and atmospheric evolution and storms. It kind of just happens to be growing in activity. And I proved a point here. We had a lot of coronal holes opening up during the summer, but we still had a drought. So there really isn't much of a connection in that respect. Let's see here. Liking the 2-9 event for 5 to 9 inch snowfall. I would hold off on trying to make any expectations on snowfall just yet. Um, Reason why, Michael, is that we don't know yet what is the snow ratio. And I'm not just talking about, when I'm talking about snow ratio, I'm usually alluding to a 12 to 1. But in this setup, with the way the thermal gradient is set up, you might be dealing more like an 8 to 1. So instead of like for 1 inch of rain, you get 10 inches of snow, it might be for 1 inch of rain, you get 8 inches of snow. This type of setup screams to me cement like snow. Okay. So, but certainly I like the idea of a storm threat. Good evening, Robert. Let's see here. Uh, Thinking between 215 and the end of the month is favorable for 1 or 2 foot KU major storms. All the players are on the table for a mega event. Phase 8 and the Atlantic and Pacific favorable. Oh, okay. So Michael's thinking that this is a favorable pattern for that. The problem you have is that not one model supports a sustained ridge around the Rockies. You're mentioning KU a lot. Costa Mussolini found that every major winter storm had one very key factor: a ridge axis around Montana. Why is that important? It's because of wavelengths, right? If your ridge axis is too far to the east, then what happens is that your whole trough gets shifted off into the Atlantic, so storm misses. If it's too far to the west, the trough is too broad, so low pressure systems tend to be a bit weaker and tend to exit out the off the east coast pretty quickly. They could even cut up towards the Great Lakes because of the nature of the trough axis. So that's very important to study when we're looking at that. That's why I would stay away from any ideas of a 1 to 2 foot type snowfall in this type of scenario. Okay. March. It could happen. I mean, a lot of things. I could win the lottery, but that doesn't mean I'd gamble on it. Let's see here. Oh, okay. The 10 and 70 millibar vortexes really got stretched the past couple of days. Yep, they did. And some real warming at 10 millibars. Again, on the Russian side of things, which last time pushed a vortex towards North America, of course, could be too much of a good thing with cold, dry air, i.e., suppression. Yes, that is a possibility. Um, I don't think we're going to have suppression threat, though, this time, because this time we are not only dealing with a more favorable MJL, but it's also the time of the seasons as well. It's starting to change. I don't think that the Arctic air will be as robust, but we'll see. One thing I noticed about tomorrow's event: the wet bulb temperatures are really, really low, and the wet bulb line is down, freezing line is down to the Delmarva. Yes, I noticed that too, and that's why I'm concerned about the ice here. I'm not concerned about overperformance of snow. Maybe in Connecticut, maybe in northern New Jersey, someone could get a bit of a surprise with some mesoscale banding via intense isotropic lifting. That's certainly a potential there that I'm going to be keeping an eye on tomorrow morning. Probably one of the first things I'm going to check. But in these scenarios where the cold air doesn't really have a lot of support to put up a fight, the transition from snow to ice tends to be faster than one might think. Then you end up with a lot of sleet and freezing rain, and your boundary layer temperatures are very cold. That is worst case scenario. And where I think that's the biggest threat is going to be to the north and west of the I-95 corridor. Okay, so we're talking about Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, the Lehigh Valley. I would not underplay the ice threat here and try to overplay the snow threat. Not in this scenario. Mm-mm. March produces the best snowstorms in Northeast PA. They can, absolutely, especially in the Poconos, their higher elevations. Absolutely. I mean, the ski season gets extended because of that. And quite frankly, we could use that because we want to avoid drought conditions. Mid February has given us some memorable snowstorms, including a couple of President's Day blizzards. Yes. Susan, I think you know all about that, right? Oh, the mid February blizzards. Yep. So yeah, they could be interesting. What is the current ground temperature, and how will that factor include freezing rain? Okay. Right now they're actually around freezing. Based on some of the data. Some of the data I have is limited in Pennsylvania. Around New Jersey, generally around freezing. So that is certainly going to be a factor initially. With the air temperatures warming up pretty quickly on the coastal plain, I'm not too concerned about that though. See, if I remember from the winter forecast discussion that ice storms were a major concern for the winter. Looks like this is going to be the case. Absolutely, absolutely, and unfortunately, this is one of the parts of the forecast I wish was not v- uh, verifying. but it looks like it might be. Could you take a look at the HRR? It suggests more snow. What are your thoughts? I really don't see. I mean, we just use the HRR. That's what we were just looking at, and it really doesn't support a lot of additional snow. Let me go back and okay, so here is the progression of the HRR. Now earlier, let's see if I can pull up an early run. I'm sorry, that's the European. Where's the HRR? There it is. Okay, so here it goes right now. And notice the sleet really eats up on this snow really quickly. Now, previous runs, let's go back to 18Z, it was very, very aggressive with the snow, trying to keep more of it, right? Trying to hold it back. Why is it backing away from that? Because now the guidance is starting to get a better idea on the nature of the warming at 850 millibars. And it's making that adjustment back. So let's see what that does in terms of the snow forecast here. Here we go. And it kind of backs off. It kind of shifts closer to my forecast. This is a bit overdone. But overall, the theme 1 or 2 inches, and then you get to your ice. I think that a lot of this here also might actually be part of this is sleet. And that's a real concern here. I would not be surprised if half of this is actually sleet rather than snow. But even still, it's far less impressive than what we were dealing with in the 18Z. And the 12Z, everyone was freaking out about because, let's see, I think this is the one that produced, 6 inches. So you can see it's slowly backing away from the earlier runs and shifting more and more to something that's a little bit more realistic. And even the 0Z, it's a little bit more realistic. If you're looking for snow, I think it's going to be in this area right here, which basically matches up nicely with the going forecast. Ice on top of cement like snow. What a wonderful combination. Yeah. I am understand. I am not hoping for this to happen. This is one of those scenarios where I will take a bus and everything goes to rain. I gladly would take that over ice. Let's see. The ridge over the Rockies is so important. I recall a number of winter storms with good snowfalls with no negative NAO because the western ridge was in the correct perfect spot. Yeah, it kind of allows you to thread the needle type setup. Let's see what we got here on YouTube. Holy right, there is a lot. Wow, look at this. It is a plethora of comments. While at SUNY Oswego, did you ever witness lake effect snow? I mean, I don't know how you don't. With that produce zero visibility? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for the note, you guys are lucky, okay? Because my professors were like, oh, great. Do a report and walk in the snow towards class. We're still having class. Everyone else is off, but all the Met majors, at this point, only about 3 or 4 of us left, um, all had class. Wonderful. So, oh yeah, we've had lake effect snow, that is for sure. Um, I don't know why Philly would have a parade. There's no reason for them to have a parade. Good evening, Steve. Happy Wednesday. All right, so there's a question here. I feel that the models are underdue the warm layer. That's why I'm going with a lot of sleet in this scenario. The observations right now line up more to this being a sleet freezing rain event more than a snow event. Okay. And I think a lot of these snow maps, they tend to not do very well with separating the sleet and snow out of there. Um, let's see here. And I'm trying to take the best questions. Dylan, I'm not calling you out. It's just that you need to stop posting GFS guidance or European guidance for 10, 15 days out. For God's sakes, man, you're going to drive yourself insane. Why do it? I don't know. I've heard a lot of talk about the polar vortex coming back, but no forecast next week or the week after indicates any real cold air. Okay, one, polar vortex is always here, and we're talking about the stretching quite a bit. The model guidance right now, because of this active storm track, is not illustrating the potential of this cold air. Okay, but that changes almost every other model run. With that being said, I do not expect the same type of cold air that we saw in January. Okay, because this time we're going to be on the leading edge. Where it's going to get real cold is going to be the northern plains and a lot of Canada. I think we're going to be on the edge, and that's why we're going to have a very active storm track. Because if we were in the heart of the cold air, we're talking about highs in the teens, stuff like that. That means your storm track is suppressed much further south. It's very difficult to get an active storm track and be in the teens and 20s. It's very rare to pull that off. Uh, you think the Sunday storm could trend south? Not really. It's not the right pattern for it yet. Let's see here. Oh, I don't try to decide whether schools get closed. So let's see what else we got here. That's a lot of questions. I'm trying to. Why does New York City keep underperforming with these snowfall events the past few winters? Um, well, it's the urban heat island effect. You get a lot of potential in terms of the snowfall, and in places like Central Park, you're going to get your snowfall accumulation, but for the rest of the city, look, you got subways. That warms your boundary layer temperature up into the 40s already. You need a really intense snowfall to overcome the warm air that is developed off of all those factors. Um, will it stay stormy all month? I'm expecting it to. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see rain or snow, but I do expect to be busy. Let's see here. What do you make out with shortwave intensifying to our west currently? That is expected. That should be happening. Um, let's see here. Uh, let's see. Some of the guidance shows some mixing for the Tuesday storm. Yeah, we have to work on the thermal gradient. Wait for that to come in, and then we'll work it out. Will there be an ice storm warnings in the Delmarva? I don't know. I don't like answering those type of questions. I'll tell you why. I don't want to speak for the National Weather Service. Okay, I will tell you that the Delmarva really isn't looking for ice here. It's more towards, let's say, Baltimore. Okay. Um, let's see here. Anything on X or Facebook? Oh boy, look at that. Let's see what we got here. Uh, how high is 850 millibars? I'm guessing feet. I'm guessing 2,000. Um, when is the ice to rain changeover on Long Island beginning for Thursday? Mostly, we're looking at trying to think here on Long Island. I would say probably around 7 a.m. All right. And while you're doing that, I'll see what we. Let's see here. Do you expect Genesis to be intense in a series of events over the next couple of weeks that could be lightning, thunder, and some events? It's possible, but not this one. Not for tomorrow morning, but certainly. When does this pattern tap out? Thinking after March 3rd, somewhere around there. Trying to travel from Cleveland, Ohio to Morris County, New Jersey over the next 5 days by way of Pittsburgh and PA Turnpike. Oh, geez. Probably a trip over 2 days. Yep. Please advise the best days for travel. between now and Sunday, Friday, Friday and Saturday morning, pretty much. Uh, is Tuesday storm looking like during the day or overnight? Not sure yet. No, I haven't really figured out the timing of it just yet. Probably something like a Tuesday afternoon through Wednesday afternoon type thing. But again, kind of have to work on the timing of it and the timing of the short waves interacting in that. So some very good questions, guys. Outstanding. Trying to answer as many as I can. Some of the questions I get on social media, some of the statements. I don't know why. Look, guys, this is a weather feed. Keep politics out of it. It's like I feel like I'm at Wendy's and someone's complaining about. It's like I could deal with sports, but for God's sakes, I mean, here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. This is a weather feed. This is a weather video, weather discussion. It's like, here's my rule of politics. No matter what you say, you're gonna piss off half the people. So why bother? You know? Uh Someone's gonna be mad, and I get angry emails. Or that one stalker, that guy was nuts. That was fun. Let's see here. I think I got all the questions done. Look at that. Yeah, I see. I mean, there's some of them that are a little repetitive. In my backyard questions are my favorite. But let's take a look and see some of. I'm gonna pull up SPC. Let's take a look at some of the mesoscale analysis here and take a look at our storm, shall we? And so a lot of people are keying in on the fact that this is stronger, but it should be, by the way. This actually should be the way it is. Okay, so it's starting to interact with the polar shortwave a little bit. This is what's going to drive your precipitation. You're starting to see it starting to evolve pretty nicely here, but we have a lot of dry air to overcome, which is why we're not seeing much sign of any precipitation showing up until you get all the way out here towards West Virginia. So let me go back to SPC, and at 850 millibars, make sure. Pretty good warm air transport already showing up here. So again, everything I'm looking at, and here's another cool thing. You could take a look at the temperature advection. Look at this wave of warm air just waiting to invade in. And what that leads to is frontogenesis, which is starting to show up. Think of this as like a bulldozer just ready to drive all this cold air out. So that is lining up pretty nicely. Let's take a look at the surface wet bulb temperature we're talking about. And again, pretty impressive. So this right here is a signal that screams to me, beware of ice. Beware. I'm not so much concerned about the snow here. I'm concerned about the ice. I mean, look at the gradient drive at 925 millibars. Not as strong as compared to what we're seeing here at 850 millibars. So when I'm seeing this, I'm thinking, okay, 850 millibars is going to warm up very quickly. 925 millibars is going to lag behind. There's my sleet signal. The surface is going to take the longest here because you got a lot of dry air to work with. Your freezing line is off the coast. So with the easterly wind, this is going to rise pretty quickly on the coastal plain. But if you are in this area right here and you have plans to travel tomorrow morning, I'd create different plans. Oh yeah, meteorology stalker. Yeah, yeah. We went to the police too. That was fun. They're like, well, if they, yeah, that was fun. That was always fun. Um, let's see. Is there any other? Will skiing in the Catskills be icy next week? Looks like it. I'm not much of a skier, but there definitely will be ice up there from this event. But these are great questions, guys. And let's see what we got here. Yeah, why not? Someone's trying to get on my good side again. Let's see. Do you expect Fern Genesis to be intense? Oh, okay. I already answered that. And I answered the travel question. So we already got all the questions answered on the live chat. That is outstanding. And if I miss some of you guys on YouTube, it's mostly because, it's typically what is it going to be in my backyard. So the pattern for snowstorms along the coast more favorably now or in January? Ooh, that's a good one. Hmm. I would say now. Although neither one is, 100% perfect. Let's see. Let me pull up here. How did every single weather forecast predict a blowtorch winter and we're wrong about? Well, I sure as hell wasn't forecasting a blowtorch winter. Um, I was forecasting near normal. If the polar vortex stretched, then we'd shift to below normal temperatures. That was like one of my what could go wrong in the forecast. I'd never bought in the idea of a blowtorch winter because I never bought into the idea of a real La Nina developing. It seemed to be very weak, if anything, and that worked out pretty well, I would say. So, um, once I saw the polar vortex stretch, forget about it. Game on. Here comes the cold air, and that worked out pretty well. Will the pattern repeat before the end of winter? Um, repeat before the end of winter. I think this is kind of like the last major pattern period, which is going to cover most of February, and then we move forward. I really do. I think that there's going to be periods in the spring where we're going to curse because it's going to be chilly, and there's going to be some of those April snow events that a lot of snow in the air, but nothing really accumulates on the ground, and you're going to get like a 6-inch snow map, and then in reality you only get like a dusting on the grass. It's going to be stuff like that. But I think this is the way the winter is going to end is basically we're going to get this string of storms. It's going to tire us out, and we're going to be looking forward to spring. And I think then we start to see our shift in March, which I still am surprised that there are some people who all they did a couple days ago, last week, in fact, all they did was read the title of saying like how winter is going to end and think I was already calling for an end of winter in February. Can anyone just read the content? I don't know. That's another rant for another time. Mental, exactly. But it's almost 9 p.m. And with that, I want to thank all of you for joining and following through. I hope I answered all your questions. There were great questions in here. So we're going to be very, very active the next couple of weeks. And with that, I just want to say if you're traveling in this weather, please give yourself enough time. Go below the speed limit. It's better to get there late than not get there at all, right? So just use some caution and as always, as I always like to say, stay safe out there.